We live in a constant state of velocity. Our modern lives are characterized by relentless motion, the flashing screens, the insistent beeps, the urgency echoing from countless corners of our days. It feels as though we are constantly chasing something just beyond our grasp, running on the premise that if we only move faster, or acquire one more thing, or meet the next looming deadline, then finally we will find a moment of true peace. But this frantic pace rarely delivers what it promises. Instead, it leaves us with a different kind of fatigue, a deep ache in the chest, a sense of perpetual unease that accompanies constant vigilance. This is the noise, the incessant clamor of contemporary existence. Our minds are bombarded by demands, predictions, and histories all at once, making stillness feel like an alien concept. We look around us, seeking a solid place to rest our weight, a quiet corner where the tide of expectation cannot reach. And in that searching, we often find ourselves caught in a current we did not choose. But perhaps peace is not something to be found out there, across some distant horizon or hidden retreat. Perhaps true stillness lies not in escaping the noise, but in finding an anchor within the very chaos. Ancient philosophy offered us this quiet counter-narrative, that profound calm is not an absence of trouble, but a state of disciplined attention. It requires us to shift our focus from what happens to us to how we choose to react when it does. This journey back to ourselves begins with recognizing the distinction between the noise and the anchor. The noise represents all those external forces, the market fluctuations, the political arguments, the shifting expectations of others, all the things that demand our immediate emotional expenditure. They feel overwhelmingly real in the moment. We invest our precious internal energy trying to control them, predicting their outcomes, or reacting to every passing stimulus as if it held ultimate importance for our survival. This attempt at comprehensive management is exhausting, and it always fails because reality itself resists total command. To anchor ourselves means learning where true power resides, within the quiet space between stimulus and response. It requires us to look inwards and ask a fundamental, challenging question that has echoed through centuries of wisdom. What belongs to me? What aspect of my inner life is genuinely mine alone, impervious to the whims of fortune or the criticism of another person? This realization serves as our primary filter, our intellectual gatekeeper against anxiety's flood. The anchor grounds us by defining a reliable territory. We are taught that much of our discomfort comes from misunderstanding jurisdiction, from treating things outside our sphere of influence as if they were personal failings or immediate threats to our peace of mind. For instance, we worry about what others will think of our career choice, about the actions of loved ones who may disappoint us, or about global events unfolding in far-off lands. These concerns, while understandable human responses, are fundamentally beyond our direct control. They are rivers flowing through terrain where we merely stand on the bank. To fixate our emotional energy upon them is like trying to hold smoke. It slips through our fingers and leaves us empty. Seneca understood this principle intimately. He taught that life's anxieties often stem from misplaced expectations, expecting perfect conditions, predictable outcomes, or constant validation, when reality inevitably deviates from this carefully constructed ideal. We suffer a profound disappointment, which manifests as distress. The remedy is not to become detached, but to become disciplined in our attention. We must cultivate an active awareness of the boundaries that define our self-mastery. Consider the difference between believing I must control this outcome and practicing I will give my utmost effort toward this outcome. One leads to paralyzing anxiety, the other fosters dedicated action, paired with serene acceptance of contingency. The anchor, therefore, is not a physical object or a single piece of advice. It is a mental discipline. It is the continuous act of pulling back from external chaos and directing our attention only to that which we can presently modify. Our judgments, our intentions, and our current actions. By consistently practicing this internal separation, this distinguishing between what belongs to me and what merely passes through me, we begin to build resilience. We start treating the noisy demands of life not as mandates for emotional upheaval, but simply as facts passing before us. This radical act of non-attachment to outcome is the first great withdrawal from the current of anxiety, allowing a subtle, deep calm to finally take root beneath the surface noise. The goal here is simple yet monumentally difficult: to cease treating our mental life as a commodity that must be protected at all costs from every perceived threat outside ourselves. We begin by redefining power itself. Power, we realize, is not the ability to change the world around us, but the unwavering capacity to remain unchanged by it. We feel it sometimes, a buzzing energy beneath the skin, a persistent hum that whispers of future worries and past mistakes. It is this state of being perpetually unsettled that we call anxiety. We chase after certainty in an unpredictable world, mistaking frantic movement for genuine progress. Our modern lives are built on endless inputs, the glow of screens, the relentless ping of notifications, the deadlines stacked like unstable towers. They teach us to react quickly, to predict instantly, and to maintain a pace that is frankly unsustainable for the human spirit. Remembering our initial lesson, we learned the vital truth. There exists an inner anchor, a core of stillness beneath the surface turmoil. This realization hinges on a fundamental philosophical shift, the deep discipline of knowing what belongs within your sphere of influence and what does not. The breath we take right now is one thing we control. The opinions of strangers tomorrow are another. These two things live in entirely separate universes. The core challenge, however, lies precisely where these universes collide. We naturally want to exert our will over everything, over the outcome of a meeting, over a loved one's emotional stability, even over favorable weather patterns. This universal human desire for total control is what generates so much suffering. It is an illusion, beautiful in its promise, but destructive in practice. The mind that craves absolute mastery sees life as a vast system needing constant optimization. When the predicted equilibrium fails, when the market dips, when the relationship falters, when the traffic gridlocks for an unexpected hour, the panic arises. This panic is simply the realization that our grip on the reins was based on fantasy. Stoicism provides us not with magic shields, but with clear architectural blueprints for the self. The philosophy reminds us to view these external forces, poverty, illness, setback, not as personal assaults, but merely as indifferent things that happen in the great theater of existence. Our job is not to change the props or the script. It is only to refine our response. The Stoics called this concept the dichotomy of control. It is perhaps one of the most liberating ideas ever put into human thought, for it cuts through decades of conditioned worry. Think of your worries like a tangled fishing line. Some ends are attached to things you can pull toward yourself, your judgments, your efforts, your willingness to listen. Other ends trail off into the vastness, other people's freedom, historical chance, fate itself. The anxiety comes from constantly trying to yank on every single strand. If we commit to identifying and cutting all those futile connections, those anxieties about things wholly outside our moral accountability, we find an immense release. We redefine power. Power is not the ability to command others or outcomes. True power is internal, resident in the sovereign judgment of how you interpret the event that has already occurred. This intellectual process is not merely an academic exercise. Seneca showed us that understanding this boundary transforms into a muscle memory. It requires constant, deliberate mental practice. We must train ourselves to catch the thought, the anxious leap toward controlling the uncontrollable at the moment it arises, and simply name it. That is outside my sphere. The battle against the illusion of control is not won by forceful denial. It is won by compassionate acceptance paired with rigorous questioning. When fear whispers, if only X were different, we must respond not with despair, but with careful philosophical inquiry. What part of this statement rests solely within my ability to choose my inner attitude? This shift in perspective changes everything about our relationships with failure. Previously, a setback felt like proof that we were inadequate, or that the world was fundamentally unjust. Through the lens of Stoic acceptance, a setback is simply information. It is an event that occurs, and your response to it determines whether you are merely reacting out of panic or acting thoughtfully from a foundation of principle. The anxiety of modern life seeks validation through reaction, through buying something new, perfecting one's outward presentation, or making intense demands on external circumstances. The Stoic path asks us instead for internal self-validation, the quiet knowledge that we have exercised reason when chaos beckoned. It is a slow, continuous descent into self-mastery. The illusion of control is comforting because it promises an end to uncertainty. But life itself is characterized by radical uncertainty. Our tranquility must therefore come from accepting not just what we cannot change today, but the absolute fact that we cannot control tomorrow either. And in that acceptance, that quiet surrender to reality's unpredictability, we finally find freedom. We become masters not of our lives necessarily, but of our own minds. Imagine the mind not as a delicate glass sculpture, easily shattered by external forces, but as something far more durable. For centuries, we have been taught to build resilience through struggle, by weathering storms until we find our footing. The true philosopher understood that this journey begins within, in cultivating what the ancient Greeks called the inner citadel of the self. The idea is simple yet profoundly challenging. Your deepest peace cannot reside on any external hill, nor can it be held captive by fortune's whims or the opinions of others. Instead, it must be built into the very core of who you are, a fortress that resists siege from outside. This citadel is not merely a fancy concept. It is a disciplined practice of recognizing and reinforcing your own rational mind against the onslaught of circumstance. Seneca understood this struggle intimately. He witnessed ambition's cruel peaks and despair's deep valleys throughout his life. He knew that the greatest threat to tranquility did not come from emperors or rivals, but often from within, from our own quick judgments, our stubborn attachments, and our tendency to mistake fleeting comfort for permanent happiness. Think of your emotional life as a battlefield sometimes. Our passions flare up like uncontrolled fires when we encounter loss or injustice. We react instantly, believing that the pain is an unbearable reality that demands immediate external change. But Seneca taught us a vital separation. There is difference between the event itself and our judgment about the event. The storm raging outside is merely a fact. Interpreting that storm as personally devastating is where the true suffering begins. The challenge of this inner citadel, then, is to become an impartial observer of your own mind. When anxiety whispers that you cannot bear the weight of tomorrow, when fear demands endless planning for every possible disaster, the inner citizen must intervene. He must remind you that a thought is not necessarily reality. It is only a mental construction. This requires us to proactively build our defenses. It means preparing ourselves for emotional setbacks long before they happen. Seneca advised what we might call forethought of adversity or premeditation of misfortune. This sounds daunting, perhaps even morbid, but consider the soldier who trains by marching in difficult conditions. He is not hoping the roads will always be smooth. He is conditioning his body to endure difficulty when it arrives. Similarly, by mentally rehearsing loss, by imagining what life would look like if you lost your job, or a treasured relationship faded away, you strip those losses of their immediate power. They become abstract possibilities rather than catastrophic certainties. The purpose of this mental exercise is not self-pity. It is self-liberation. It's about reaching a place of genuine emotional equanimity. When you have spent time preparing for the worst, when the inevitable minor setbacks arrive, they are met with a studied calm. You think, yes, this happened, and I endured it before, and I can endure it again. The inner citadel is therefore built upon two pillars: intellectual discipline and emotional detachment. Intellectually, we must constantly analyze our impulses, questioning the assumptions that drive panic. Emotionally, we must practice accepting reality, the messy, imperfect nature of things as they are, right now. We learn to accept the friction of life without letting it dismantle our core sense of self-worth or peace. True freedom, Seneca argued, was not the ability to control every external outcome. No, true freedom was the internal sovereignty, the deep and unshakable realization that no outside force has the final authority over your judgment, your integrity, or your response. That power, this inner self-mastery, is entirely yours, and it cannot be taken away. This citadel remains a place of constant work. It requires patience and unwavering commitment. We must return to it daily, sweeping away the dust of fleeting worry, reinforcing its walls with reasoned judgment, and keeping its heart centered on what truly matters: living justly, acting courageously, and maintaining serenity regardless of the tumult around us. This is where the grounding happens. This is the foundation for lasting calm that cannot be shaken by the modern chaos. We have learned to distinguish between the chaos of external events and the quiet authority over our own judgments. We have anchored ourselves in the wisdom that much of modern anxiety springs from a desire for total control, a futile pursuit, as we now understand. But sometimes, fear does not spring from what has already happened. It germinates silently in the fertile, dark soil of what might be. It is the dread echo of tomorrow, ringing loudly enough to drown out the peace of today. The mind, restless and predictive, delights in painting futures that are worse than reality itself. We become architects of imagined catastrophes, dedicating our precious emotional energy not to living well now, but to preparing for a storm that may never arrive. This is the burden of anticipatory anxiety. It makes us prisoners of probability, shackled by the what if. If we constantly live in the hypothetical future, how can we ever truly inhabit the present moment? The immediate now vanishes under the weight of projected worries. This emotional habit feels so normal in our hurried world, yet it is perhaps the most profound misapplication of our inner strength. The ancients understood this pattern perfectly. They saw that worrying about a possible wrong was not preparing for it. It was merely suffering twice, once in imagination. And again, when reality finally arrived, the worry itself became its own agony, a self-inflicted wound before the actual injury could even be done. This is where we revisit Seneca's powerful guide, the premeditation of misfortune, or premeditatio malorum. This practice might sound counterintuitive to someone seeking peace. It seems like deliberately summoning worry. Yet, it is in this calculated confrontation with dread that true emotional resilience is forged. We are not practicing for despair, we are practicing for stability. The goal of premeditation is to dismantle the power of surprise. When something difficult happens, a professional failure, a relationship ending, a sudden illness, the shock value, the element of utter unpreparedness, strips away much of its emotional weight. By imagining these setbacks in advance, we tell our minds, I have faced this before. I know how to navigate it. This shifts adversity from an overwhelming surprise to a manageable lesson. Consider not the misfortune itself, but the narrative surrounding it. We fear failure not because of the outcome, but because of what that failure would say about us, our competence, our worth, our control. The premeditation forces us to look past the drama and see the raw mechanics. What actions can I take? Who can support me? What is truly necessary for me to survive this? We must understand that we are practicing for virtue. We are not hardening ourselves against pain. We are strengthening our character so that when life delivers its blows, our core self remains untouched. The adverse event becomes merely a setting for us to demonstrate our inner discipline, our courage, our justice, our temperance. The technique is systematic and requires intellectual honesty. It does not mean dwelling morbidly on worst-case scenarios, rather means approaching potential pain with the clarity of an accountant dealing with inventory. We ask, if X happens, what specific things are true? What judgments will be forced upon me? And most critically, are those required responses actually within my sphere of action? For example, let us examine career anxieties. We worry endlessly about redundancy or professional rejection. The modern mind paints a picture of utter ruin, lost identity, financial collapse, exile. This painted tragedy is vastly more vivid than the reality. The practice asks you to break down that fear. Instead of I will lose everything, the Stoic inquiry becomes, if I lost my job, what are 3 practical things I already possess? Who are 2 people who would support me? What single skill do I still maintain that keeps me valuable? By systematically cataloging our resources, our skills, our relationships, and our core philosophical framework, we deflate the emotional enormity of the imagined disaster. The fear doesn't vanish entirely, but it shrinks from a terrifying monolith to a list of logistical challenges. The premeditatio malorum does not teach us indifference in its purest form. Rather, it teaches us robust empathy for our own human fallibility. It acknowledges that life will contain difficulty, loss, and disappointment, and by accepting this inevitability, by treating misfortune as a regular, predictable element of the human condition, we strip away the magic and the terror from potential setbacks. We are training our emotional muscles to withstand reality, not fiction. When we approach uncertainty with this practiced mindset, the natural tendency is to move away from panic and toward thoughtful preparation. We find that profound calm resides not in the guarantee of smooth waters, but in the knowledge of our ability to weather any storm, knowing we have already done the difficult work of anticipating its reach. The fear of what might be remains a persistent companion for many. But now we treat it as merely an emotional habit, a thought pattern requiring correction. We replace the dramatic what if with the measured, practical query. Given my resources and my character, how will I meet this reality? This thoughtful anticipation is not morbid preparation, it is radical self-empowerment. It is the final step in building that inner citadel, making sure that even if the outer world batters down at the gates, our response remains deliberate, measured, and profoundly, calmly free. To live fully means not letting fear of what might be prevent you from embracing the potent reality of what is right now. The calm awaits on the other side of disciplined thought. When the wave of anxiety crests, it often feels inescapable. It is a tidal force that sweeps us off balance, pulling us into a panic fueled by immediate fear and imagined disaster. Our instinct in moments of high stress is to react, to speak, to rush, to solve immediately. But Stoicism teaches us an even harder, more counterintuitive lesson, that the greatest power available to us is the power to pause, the ability to insert a deliberate moment of stillness between stimulus and response. This pause button philosophy is not about ignoring distress. It is about respecting it enough to observe it. It demands a physical intervention in our mental chaos. When we feel the pressure building, the shallow breath, the racing heart, the knot tightening in the chest, we must remember that this feeling itself is merely an event passing through us, not a permanent state of being. The fundamental question you must ask yourself in that instant, when everything feels urgent and volatile, is simple yet profoundly challenging. Is this within my sphere of influence? This is the litmus test that cuts through the panic. Does my worrying about tomorrow's outcome actually change what I can do right now? Or am I simply performing a mental exercise of futile self-torture? Many of us live lives dictated by external factors we cannot command. The economy fluctuates beyond our control. Other people will inevitably disappoint or misunderstand us. The weather changes regardless of our wishes. To spend energy worrying about these vast, unchangeable territories is to waste the precious fuel of a life lived with purpose. The pause forces us to retract that wasted energy. It pulls our focus back inward, like drawing a line around ourselves in the midst of a storm. This mental boundary asserts sovereignty over our immediate choices and judgments. Our judgment becomes our anchor, It is the single most powerful tool at our disposal, far exceeding any external force. Consider the physical aspects of this pause. When anxiety grips us, we often become physically tight, unable to breathe deep enough. The first grounding technique must therefore be bodily. Stop whatever you are doing. Take one deliberate breath. Not a quick gasp for air, but a slow, measured inhalation that travels down into your belly, followed by an even slower exhalation. This simple act is a physical interruption of the stress cycle. It signals to your primal nervous system that, for this moment, there is no immediate threat. While breathing or observing our surroundings, noticing 3 things you can see, 2 things you can hear, 1 thing you can feel beneath your feet, we are engaging in an act of radical presence. We pull ourselves out of the spiral of what if and anchor ourselves firmly in the certainty of right here. This is where true calm begins to germinate. This practice of pausing trains us not just for momentary crises, but for a sustained way of being. It transforms anxiety from a reactive emotion into an observed data point. You are no longer the passenger swept away by your emotions. You become the detached observer in the cockpit, capable of analyzing the storm without succumbing to it. The philosopher Seneca understood this necessity intimately. He taught us that we should not wait for trouble to strike before practicing resilience. The pause button philosophy is fundamentally proactive. It means training our minds like a muscle, making the choice to remain still and question the reality of the emergency, even when the body screams for immediate action. It means defaulting to reflection instead of reaction when life presents itself as a continuous barrage. 1,000 overlapping demands demanding instant attention. The pause button becomes our greatest act of resistance. It is saying, I acknowledge this demand, but I refuse to let it dictate my internal state. I will process this information through the filter of wisdom first, before I expend any energy responding. The deeper we practice this conscious separation, the easier it becomes to maintain distance from the emotional turmoil caused by other people or external chaos. We learn that while we cannot control the input, the traffic jam, the unfair critique, the broken promise, we retain total jurisdiction over our interpretation of that input. And that self-governance is the ultimate source of peace. Embrace this pause not as a luxury, but as an absolute necessity for mental survival. It is your sanctuary in the noise, a quiet moment of undeniable control, found deep within the turbulent landscape of your own mind. Throughout these chapters, we have learned powerful tools for the mind. We started by recognizing the constant, overwhelming noise of modern life and locating our anchor, the steady self that exists beneath the surface clamor. We understood that much of our anxiety stems from a fundamental misunderstanding, believing that our peace depends on controlling external events or people's choices. The philosophy teaches us to draw a clear line between what is truly ours and what remains beyond our sphere of influence. This distinction is perhaps the most revolutionary act of self-governance we can perform. But knowing this rule intellectually is only the first step. True mastery requires shifting from intellect to lived experience. It demands that when the chaos returns, the training we have undergone does not fail us. Our goal today, and in this chapter, is to refine our understanding of power itself. Not power over others or power over circumstances, but the quiet, profound power of observation. We spent time examining Seneca's wisdom, building the inner citadel brick by mental brick. We learned that when life presents us with difficulty, a professional setback, a fractured relationship, an unexpected loss, we are not instantly defeated simply because of the event itself. The true challenge lies in our subsequent judgment about that event. It is not the wind that damages the house, it is the way we decide to view the damage. We must therefore train ourselves to step back from our immediate emotional reaction. The deepest mistake anxious minds make is treating emotion as a signal for rescue, rather than understanding it simply as data. They mistake the intensity of the feeling, the racing heart, the knot in the stomach, for an objective truth about reality. But feelings are simply reactions. They are current states passing through us. To be enslaved by them is to live perpetually adrift, reacting solely to whim and fear. This brings us to a crucial shift in perspective: acceptance. Not resignation, not giving up, but recognizing the natural flow of things. Just as water cannot fight its own momentum, nor can we force change against the immutable current of time and reality. The Stoics did not advocate for simply lying down by the riverbank. They taught us to understand how the river flows. Think of anxiety itself through this lens. If you were to observe a rushing river, what do you see? You see movement. You see turbulence, perhaps powerful undertows pulling beneath the surface. When we are gripped by worry, it feels exactly like that current, unstoppable, forceful, and threatening to sweep us away entirely. We spend our energy battling the water, trying desperately to dam the flow, to stop the waves from rising. The practice of acceptance is not about ceasing effort. It is about cessation of resistance. It is learning to float, to acknowledge that the current exists, recognizing its power, but understanding that you are capable of maintaining your own center of gravity upon it. You accept the reality of the river, the unpredictable turns, the inevitable rapids, and instead, you focus only on the immediate buoyancy beneath you. You become a skilled observer of the natural process of being. Consider how often we suffer not because of what happens, but because of our desperate resistance to what is happening. We fight aging. We resist the necessary endings. We try to halt relationships that have naturally run their course. This refusal to accept change, this stubborn clinging to a previous state, generates more internal conflict than the reality itself ever could. The natural current does not judge the boat for being tossed by the waves. It simply moves. Our inner life must adopt that same impartial flow. We are going to practice distinguishing between emotions as commands and emotions as information. An anxious feeling is not a command to panic. It is merely data informing us that there is an imbalance, that we need to reassess our expectations or our commitments. This requires radical attention to the present moment. The mind, when anxious, habitually pulls us backward toward hypotheticals. What if this was different? Or pushes us forward into panicked projections. And what will happen next week? Both are mental prisons built of might be. They do not exist in the now. Only the now is the only place where action, observation, and peace can genuinely occur. The disciplined act of acceptance, therefore, is the deepest form of engagement with reality itself. It means looking at a difficult situation, a criticism from a loved one, a professional rejection, and saying, "This is what is happening right now. I see it. And while I do not like this fact, I can accept its current existence." Acceptance does not mean apathy or indifference. Quite the opposite. It means recognizing that because we have fully accepted the reality of the situation, our energy is finally freed from fighting what cannot be altered. That liberated energy, that calm breath in the center of the storm, is where true virtue resides. It allows us to act with justice, to speak with clarity, and to face adversity not as a curse, but as fertile ground for self-mastery. The continuous practice is this: when anxiety rises, do not try to crush it or fight it. Instead, pause. Imagine yourself on the riverbank, watching the turmoil pass. Observe the emotion like a distant boat, powerful, visible, yet completely separate from your own stable viewpoint. Let it flow past. Repeat this mantra internally. I acknowledge this feeling, and I observe its passage. This act of detached witnessing is the quiet mastery that finally anchors the restless spirit to the grounded reality of being. We have spent the last chapters learning how to build resilience. We have mastered the art of pausing when anxiety hits, and we have learned that much suffering comes from trying too hard to control things that are simply beyond our reach. This understanding is vital, but it is not enough. Sometimes, even after we successfully filter away what we cannot influence, we find ourselves caught in a different kind of trap. The modern mind excels at anticipating threats, allowing us to endlessly rehearse worst-case scenarios, scenarios which, by definition, are only possibilities, shadows on the cave wall. This constant mental churning exhausts us and keeps us perpetually braced for impact. To stop being anxious is not simply about managing your thoughts. It is about fundamentally shifting where you find value. It is about redirecting your gaze away from unpredictable outcomes and back toward the unwavering certainty of your own character. The Stoic realization, which often proves revolutionary to the modern sensibility, is this: the highest good we can pursue, the only thing truly under our command, resides in virtue itself. To understand this pivot, let us reconsider what success means. Society defines success through outcomes: the perfect job title, the desired relationship, the accolade, or the accumulation of wealth. These things are inherently unstable. They depend on the fickle whims of others and the unpredictable tides of fortune. To base our deepest sense of self-worth on such external pillars is to build our lives upon sand. The true challenge is finding a foundation that does not erode with changing circumstances. This foundation, according to classical wisdom, is virtue, that internal commitment to living excellently, justly, and bravely. It means aligning your will with reason, regardless of how inconvenient or difficult the external reality may be. Virtue is not just an abstract ideal. It is a practical orientation toward action. When you approach a challenging situation, whether it is public criticism or professional failure, our natural tendency is to measure the impact on us. We think, what will this do to my reputation? How much will this hurt my goals? But the Stoic redirect forces us inward. Instead of asking what this outcome means for me, we ask, what does this situation require of me? This question changes everything. It transforms a potential source of deep anxiety into an immediate exercise in character. If a difficult confrontation arises, your peace does not hinge on whether the other person respects you. It hinges on whether you speak with genuine honesty and fairness. If a project fails spectacularly, your inner dignity is defined not by the failure itself, but by the effort and diligence with which you managed the task until its inevitable conclusion. To practice this shift, we must systematically separate our internal self from our external achievements. Consider justice. You cannot command another person to act justly toward you. Their judgment remains within their control. Yet, you can choose, in that very moment of conflict, to respond with measured fairness and dignity. Courage demands nothing of the outcome, only that you face the situation head-on without flinching from your own convictions. This philosophy proposes a radical shift. Success is not reaching a destination. It is maintaining virtue while traversing the journey. Imagine viewing setbacks, a loss of money, rejection, or perceived slight, not as wounds to be prevented, but as materials for forging character. They become training weights in the gymnasium of the mind. How do we activate this belief? Through constant conscious reframing. Whenever anxiety surfaces because you fear a potential negative outcome, pause and practice the virtue test. Ask yourself, what is the most virtuous way to respond right now? Is it with excessive defensiveness or calm, rational inquiry? Is it with procrastination or immediate responsible action? Holding this single internal standard, virtue acts like a spiritual gravitational pull, drawing all your mental energy away from the uncertain future and anchoring it firmly in the integrity of the present moment. When you commit to acting well, you achieve something far more reliable than happiness or acclaim. You establish unshakable self-respect. This is why we say that virtue is the only true good. Because even if every external thing, every possession, every relationship, every success metric is stripped away from you, your capacity to act with wisdom and integrity remains untouched. It resides within the citadel of your own judgment. This internal power, detached from fortune's favor, is the definitive anchor against the storm of modern life. Embracing virtue means accepting that while outcomes are subject to fate and chance, our response, our will, remains eternally ours. We have journeyed a long way already. We have learned to separate the turmoil of outside events from the quiet judgment within our own minds. We have understood that much of what causes us deep anxiety is simply believing we must control what we cannot touch, the whims of others, the sudden shifts of fortune, or the unpredictability of tomorrow. If that is true, then where does our power truly lie? It resides only in how we choose to regard reality. This is a fragile understanding, one that takes daily repetition to become natural. It means accepting what is, even when it feels wrong, because resistance itself is the source of suffering. The core challenge now, therefore, is not simply knowing these philosophies, but embedding them into the muscle memory of our spirit. We must move from intellectual assent to practical habit. And for this, we turn to a technique that might sound counterintuitive, even unsettling at first: negative visualization. To prepare ourselves not only for what goes wrong, but also to genuinely appreciate what remains. Think back to how easily we take things for granted. The routine comfort of our possessions, the predictable cycle of our days, the reliable nature of those who care for us. These things are woven into the fabric of our immediate reality, and when they feel secure, they become invisible. We forget the preciousness of simple stability until it is threatened. The Stoics understood this vulnerability. They realized that if we only ever imagine good things happening, we will live in a state of emotional fragility, constantly worried that the bubble might pop. To build lasting resilience, however, we must occasionally train ourselves to accept discomfort and even loss. This is not an exercise in despair. It is an act of profound mental preparation. The concept is simple. By systematically imagining the temporary absence of things we deem necessary, whether it is comfort, a possession, or even certain relationships, we build what the philosophers called durable indifference. It does not mean becoming cold-hearted, but rather understanding that our happiness cannot be tethered to perishable goods or fleeting circumstances. Let us practice this mental walk through potential hardship. Do not treat these thoughts as prophecy, but as rigorous preparation for the soul. Imagine gently losing something small today, perhaps a prized book, a favorite piece of clothing, or even just the time you spent on it. Feel the initial pinch of loss, that tiny flutter in your chest that says, "Wait, this was good." Acknowledge that feeling. Then observe what remains. Does your ability to read diminish because the physical book is gone? Or does the love for knowledge remain intact, simply needing a new vessel? This mental rehearsal of setbacks allows us two vital things. First, it reduces the power of surprise. When a minor misfortune occurs in real life, a flat tire, a canceled meeting, an unexpected rejection, it strikes you not with shock, but with a weary recognition. You have already practiced the sensation of scarcity, therefore, its emotional weight is significantly reduced. Second, and more profoundly, it forces us to locate our true sources of stability. When we strip away external supports, when we imagine the world dimmed by circumstance, we find that our fundamental human capacities remain. Our capacity for reason, our ability to care justly, and our intrinsic strength of will. These are things no thief can take, no market crash can undo, and no fickle crowd can dictate. The goal is not to wish harm upon yourself, but rather to build a spiritual muscle memory that allows you to greet adversity not with panic or despair, but with measured calm. To meet difficulty with the steady assurance that while things will change, and they always do, the inner architecture of yourself remains sound. Imagine a longer absence. Imagine losing your livelihood. Picture yourself stripped down to basic necessities. Initially, the mind might grasp at the phantom securities it once held dear. It might panic over the loss of status or comfort. But with practice, you begin to see beyond those superficial layers. You start focusing on skills, your ability to negotiate, your capacity for patience, your wit. These are portable virtues. The negative visualization is therefore a radical form of gratitude, disguised as preparation. It cultivates an appreciation so deep that it resists the intoxicating grip of excessive desire. You become less attached to external validation and more invested in the quality of your response. Your wealth shifts from what you own to who you are when everything else is taken away. This state, this genuinely detached indifference, is not apathy. It is elevated focus. It means that a loss does not shake your entire system. It merely adjusts one component while allowing the core engine of self-worth and rationality to continue running smoothly. You realize that the external world offers circumstances, but only you possess the power to judge them, and thus to suffer from them. This constant mental practice, the negative visualization, the pre-mortem review of minor failures, is how we become masters of our own internal climate. We are preparing for life, not by building higher walls against external threats, but by cultivating a resilient spirit that finds beauty in endurance and strength in acceptance. This inner calm, built one imagined difficulty at a time, is the greatest fortress of all. We have spent time examining the theory of calm. We have built models for understanding anxiety, and we have practiced techniques like negative visualization to strip away our dependence on external comforts. But knowledge no matter how profound, remains just a beautiful thing until it is lived. It must move from the dry pages of philosophy into the messy reality of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. This final journey takes us beyond the classroom setting, past the theory, and right into the current chaos of modern life itself. The true test of Stoicism is not what we know, but how we act when the noise is loudest. The difficulty lies in transition. It is easy to discuss the dichotomy of control when you are safely ensconced on a couch with a book open on your knee. It is difficult when that very principle must guide you through a sudden traffic jam or during a conversation with someone whose opinions seem impossible to navigate. The moment we leave the philosophical sanctuary and re-enter the flow of demanding life, our minds often revert to old, deeply ingrained habits, the habit of overreaction, the desperate search for external blame, the urge to fully control every variable. Think of your mind not as a museum piece under glass, but as a muscle. A muscle only gains true strength through rigorous, sometimes awkward use. We cannot simply read about self-mastery, we must perform it. The goal here is not sudden perfection, for the journey toward inner peace is lifelong and characterized by inevitable stumbles. It is about cultivating the persistent awareness, the gentle habit of questioning, that serves as your constant internal guide. Consider a predictable moment of stress, one you know is coming. Perhaps it is that difficult professional meeting where disagreement feels personal. Perhaps it is encountering someone who dismisses your genuine concerns. When these moments arise, we are trained to feel the immediate physical flare of anxiety, the quickened breath, the tightening in the chest, the rush of adrenaline demanding action. But now, remember the pause. That pause is not optional. It is the entire point of the exercise. It is the single moment between feeling and acting that holds all your freedom. In that space, that necessary fractional second of delay, you must perform a quick mental inventory. The anxious mind screams for answers. Who is wrong? How do I fix this? What if they criticize me? But the trained Stoic voice asks a far simpler, grounding question. Is this variable truly within my sphere of influence? By asking that simple query, you instantly sever your emotional connection to anything that exists outside your own judgment or action. You cut the energy drain immediately. This internal triage is your most vital tool. When confronted with external injustice, the unfair critique, the sudden cancellation, the unpredictable mood of another person, you must mentally practice separating the event from your assessment of it. The rain falls regardless of whether you feel annoyed by it. The rude comment happens regardless of how valuable your opinion is. What matters? Only what judgment do you give to these things? To judge an external event as catastrophic or merely as data requiring rational response. This reframing shifts all power back to you. You realize that while while no one can control the wind, you retain absolute sovereignty over how you choose to anchor yourself against its passing gusts. Your focus narrows, becoming intensely specific, not on changing the world, but on maintaining your own inner consistency. The application of philosophy thus becomes less about grand dramatic breakthroughs and more about a collection of minute choices made dozens of times every day. It is choosing stillness instead of panic during gridlock. It is deciding to listen with genuine curiosity rather than formulating immediate defense when challenged in conversation. It is acknowledging discomfort, perhaps the physical strain of exhaustion or the fatigue of emotional labor, without letting that discomfort define your worth or your ability to act virtuously. We are essentially training a muscle called self-awareness. We teach ourselves to observe our initial flashpoints, the moments where we feel the intense pull toward unproductive worrying. And instead of participating in that spiral, we step back like an observer watching a storm on a distant mountaintop. We recognize it for what it is: temporary emotion, not permanent truth. This process creates something profound called psychological resilience. Resilience is not about avoiding pain. It is the demonstrated capacity to absorb hits, the inevitable disappointments, the professional stumbles, the personal rejections, and continue functioning with integrity and calm. When you have practiced viewing setbacks as mere practice grounds for virtue, when you have routinely detached your sense of worth from favorable outcomes, those real-life blows lose their terrifying power. You begin to understand that mastery is not achieved by solving every problem the world presents. Mastery is achieved by being consistently unimpressed by it. It is the quiet recognition that underneath all the clamor, beneath all the change, there remains a single core of self, a calm mind, prepared not for perfection, but for reality itself. This understanding transforms anxiety from a consuming terror into a manageable signal, a simple reminder that you need to remember where your true power lies, anchored within your own unshakable judgment. We have journeyed through the doctrines of philosophy, learning how to dissect anxiety itself. We learned that much of our suffering is not caused by what happens to us, but by the judgments we make about what happens. This realization is profound, a shift in perspective that changes everything we thought we knew about control. But understanding these principles is only the first step. It does not guarantee peace. Mastery is not a destination reached after reading enough books or attending enough seminars. It is an art of continuous effort. It is found in the quiet space between impulse and action, the momentary breath taken before responding to provocation. The ancient Stoics did not view tranquility as something bestowed upon them by circumstance. They understood it as a disciplined achievement. It required the cultivation of a unique kind of vigilance, a tireless awareness that we must maintain over our own minds. Think of self-mastery not as suppressing emotions, for those are natural parts of the human experience, but rather as gently guiding them towards wisdom. We must learn to observe fear without becoming it, to acknowledge grief without being consumed by it. The ultimate goal is what Seneca might call inner sovereignty, a state where our foundational sense of worth and peace cannot be disturbed by the inevitable chaos of the world outside. This mastery asks us to become observers first, participants second. We must train ourselves to greet every moment, the unexpected delay, the harsh word, the failure we anticipated, but still received, not with immediate reaction, but with a deliberate pause. That pause is where our freedom resides. Remembering the dichotomy of control, we are taught that much of human energy is tragically wasted in attempts to manage the unpredictable actions of others or to force outcomes upon a stubborn world. The river of external events simply flows. Our only true domain lies within the fortress of our own judgments. To live wisely is therefore to constantly redraw the borders of our responsibility. Our power does not reside in changing the traffic pattern, nor in compelling another person's opinion. It resides solely in deciding how we will interpret what transpires around us. This practice leads us deeper than mere self-control. It cultivates a quiet indifference, not the apathy misunderstood by outsiders, but a resilient detachment from outcomes. We learn to love the process of striving and exercising virtue more than the reward itself. When our worth is tied only to what we achieve, we are fragile. But when our worth is anchored in the integrity of our character, that anchor cannot be pulled loose by temporary misfortune. The quiet mastery, then, is simply the act of returning again and again to this point of self-awareness. It means developing a steady rhythm within the storm. When life presses down upon us with crushing weight, when anxiety shouts its demands into our consciousness, demanding immediate fixes or drastic changes, we are taught to take a breath and ask a single, simple question. What is truly mine to command? If the answer points outward, then our focus must shift inward. If it points back to our judgment, then that is where all our effort lies. This requires us to integrate every tool we have discussed: the preventative thought of potential loss, the acceptance of the current moment, the prioritization of character over circumstance, into the fabric of daily living. It becomes a seamless habit of reflection. When facing a difficult conversation, we do not plan out every perfect sentence. Rather, we commit to responding with justice and rationality in the heat of the moment. When faced with failure, we do not descend into self-pity. Instead, we view it as simply data, information showing where our preparation needs strengthening or where our virtue can be practiced anew. The mastery is found in acknowledging that discomfort is a necessary teacher. The anxiety we feel today, the frustration, the pressure, these are not signs of weakness requiring fixing, but raw material requiring philosophical shaping. They demand that we live attentively, recognizing the quiet power inherent in simple presence. Presence means showing up fully for whatever moment arrives, accepting it as exactly what it is, and then choosing the most virtuous response possible. It is a subtle and continuous dance of self-restraint. It asks us to replace frantic reaction with measured deliberation. It requires acknowledging that life will remain unpredictable. External chaos remains inevitable. Our only true refuge, our quiet mastery, lies in cultivating an inner citadel so strong and so settled that even when the world outside roars its loudest, we hear only the steady beat of our own reasoned heart. This profound peace is not a cure for modern chaos, but rather a reliable lens through which to view it, a lens that grants us the undeniable calm knowing that, despite all things, fundamentally